All right, are you ready for today's story? It is called Red Cedars and Grizzly Bears. Today we are going to review the tasks Lewis and Clark have accomplished so far. We are going to describe additional things Lewis and Clark encountered related to the tasks that they were asked to accomplish. We are going to demonstrate an understanding of the word record. And then we are going to record information about the tasks that Lewis and Clark have accomplished. Today's key vocabulary, we have overturned and record. Overturned means flipped upside down. The cat overturned the bowl of water. Record. Record is to write down information in order to remember or share it. During the meeting, Leonardo used a notepad to record details about the topics discussed. Alrighty, this should be pretty quick by now. Where is the Atlantic Ocean? Right here. The Appalachian Mountains? Right here. The Mississippi River? Right here. Rocky Mountains? Over here. The Louisiana Purchase? The area between the Rocky Mountains and the Mississippi River. What about the Missouri River? It cuts across from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. Okay. And what about the Pacific Ocean? Right over there. So, where did Lewis and Clark spend their winter in the last read aloud? With the Mandan and the Hidatsa tribes, right? And who joined them? Sacagawea, her husband, and then her little baby, Pompey. All right, so what tasks have Lewis and Clark accomplished so far? Gathering plants and animals and information on them, and making friends with the Native Americans. Today, Lewis and Clark are going to encounter more new things on their expedition. Remember our key vocabulary, overturned and record. I want you to listen carefully to find out what new things Lewis and Clark encounter and how they keep track of what they encounter. After Lewis and Clark sent some of the team back east with reports and scientific samples for President Jefferson, the captains and the rest of their crew continued west. They rowed in 2 of their original pirogues plus 6 new canoes made from hollowed-out trees. These canoes, about 30 feet long and 3 feet wide, were hard to balance. More than once, as the men were getting used to them, the canoes overturned in mid-river, forcing the men to fish out wet supplies before going on. Despite this, Lewis wrote in his journal that the men were happy and healthy. Soon, they left behind the flat plains and entered hilly land. Now, the Missouri River became more and more difficult to travel. Forests of western red cedars lined the banks of the river. These beautiful trees were so important to the Native Americans of the area that some Native Americans called themselves the people of the red cedar, performing special ceremonies before chopping down the huge evergreens. Remember, we talked about this a little bit in our Animals and Habitats unit, but evergreen trees are trees that are green all year long, okay? Lewis and Clark knew it would be impossible to take an entire tree back with them because of its gigantic size, almost 200 feet above the ground. That's as tall as a 20-story building. Nevertheless, the tree was so important to the lives of the Native Americans that they knew they must gather samples and record many uses. They drew pictures and collected branches, cones, and seeds. As they learned more about the western red cedar from the Native Americans in the area, both Lewis and Clark wrote about the importance of the western red cedar in their journals. The people and animals of the Northwest relied upon the tree for their existence. Native Americans used the bark of the tree to weave mats, baskets, and clothing, and used the wood to build canoes. Elk ate the leaves and shoots of the enormous tree. Bears hibernated or slept through the winter in hollowed cedar logs. The men heard often of the bears called grizzly bears that made their homes in the hollowed-out logs of the cedars. So they made their way up the Missouri. So as they made their way up the Missouri, William Clark warned, "Keep a sharp eye out for grizzly bears." One of the hunters said, "Don't worry, Captain. We've seen plenty of bears back in Kentucky. Black bears, yes. Grizzly bears, no. From what I hear, it's like the difference between a house cat and a lion." Okay, so he's saying that the grizzly bears are like the lion, and that they're not very friendly, while black bears can be friendly. Okay, so that's what he's saying. Be careful of the grizzly bears because they are not very nice. One day, Lewis and another man were out hunting along the riverbank. Suddenly, they saw two giant grizzly bears up ahead. The bears rose up onto their hind legs, up and up until they stood 8 feet tall. Then, roaring, the bears charged. Raising their rifles and taking careful aim, Lewis and his companion shot one bear, but the other one kept coming right at them with frightening speed. "Run!" shouted Lewis, and the two men turned and ran for their lives. Lewis and the other man stopped running to take another shot, turned, took aim, and fired at the same instant. The loud bang was followed by a tense moment as the bear suddenly stopped running. It held still for a moment, and then it toppled over. Only when they were sure that the grizzly bear was dead did Lewis and his companion carefully approach the animal. Lewis later wrote in his journal that the bear weighed between 500 and 600 pounds and was 8.5 feet tall. That's taller than 2 first graders, one standing on top of another. After this frightening chase, Lewis told the whole party, "From now on, we must always move about and do even the simplest actions in parties of 2 or more. One man alone going up against a grizzly bear would not stand a chance." Okay. All right, so what tasks did Lewis and Clark accomplish in the story today? They discovered a new plant and a new animal. What was one plant that Lewis and Clark discovered? The red cedar. And can you talk about the red cedar? Tell me about it. It was really tall. It had needles. It was an evergreen, meaning it stayed green all year round. Could they bring a red cedar back with them? No. Why not? It was too big. So what did they decide to do instead? Instead, they decided to draw pictures and collect cones and branches. Okay. What was the animal that Lewis and Clark discovered? The grizzly bear. Are grizzly bears and black bears the same? No, grizzly bears are much more wild, okay? Okay, in the read aloud you heard, nevertheless, the western red cedar was so important to the lives of the Native Americans that Lewis and Clark knew they must gather samples and record its many uses. Say the word record with me. Record. When you record something, you write down information in order to remember or share it. Mia recorded how many cars passed her house in an hour. What's something that you could record? Try to use the word record when you say it. All right. Did we review the tasks of Lewis and Clark? Did we describe additional things that Lewis and Clark encountered related to the tasks that they were accomplishing? Yeah. Did we demonstrate an understanding of the word record? Yep. And then for your assignment, you are going to record information about the tasks that Lewis and Clark have accomplished. See you next time.